What's up everyone, it's Dakota and welcome back to another Pioneer video, and today we're going to be taking a look at a control deck, but not in the typical sense. And I believe that for a time, up until recently, this was also one of the more popular Lotus Field decks to be playing, really until obviously there's some innovation, which if you want to see, what exactly Lotus Field has done to reestablish itself as one of the higher played decks in the format, please consider subscribing to the channel and going and checking out that video as well. Really interesting. It has a sweet new win condition, but we're not here to talk about that. Unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on who you are. This is essentially a blue-white control deck that is able to splash for a few things on the sideboard. Getting the 4-color control moniker, I think, uncredulously, but whatever. That's just me. So this was taken to a 10th place finish in the Pioneer Challenge, so just missing out on top 8. And this deck, like we mentioned, is a Lotus Field deck. So Lotus Field, hexproof, enters battlefield tap, sacrifice 2 lands when it comes into play, and it adds 3 mana of any one color. So we know that the Lotus Field deck is trying to put this into play and do it like honestly to start, but then using cards like Thespian Stage, like this deck is doing as well, to copy it to get more copies of it without having to play more Lotus Fields. However, this deck has a way to basically play a Lotus Field and then keep all of its permanents around. So we have Strict Proctor as like the first card that has like some added utility to what is going on. So Strict Proctor is a 2-mana 1/3 flyer. Whenever a permanent entering the battlefield causes a triggered ability to trigger, counter that trigger unless its controller pays 2. Obviously, even if you can pay the cost to counter or to not have your Lotus Field countered, you still get to keep the Lotus Field. So you don't end up paying it, and you get to have your Lotus Field stick around and your 2 lands, which is neat. Obviously, could backfire pretty heavily, especially with the Lotus Field decks now seeing play, because giving them that extra mana could just mean the difference. Especially when they could just go Thespian Stage, use the 2 lands they have to keep to copy their own, and then untap the stage and the transform stage and the Lotus Field, and just generate tons of mana. But you're doing this like unfairly. There's obviously some other ETB triggers, mainly from like the mono green side of things, and even the Rakdos sacrifice decks and that with like their Cat Oven, that it's pretty useful. And of course, like, gets to a point where you just get to do this once, and then you can play like a Lotus Field every turn. So I mean, you go from turn 3, you're going up to potentially 6 mana, just from making a regular land drop, and even more past. I mean, just having an insane amount of ramp, and it's just crazy. It just gets to be super insane after a while. So it lets you play a lot of these big spells and take advantage of the fact that eventually, from turn 3 onward, you're able to just play Lotus Fields and then copy Lotus Fields to generate more mana. So starting off, you have Hornlock Whale, which can put the owner of the target attacking creature you didn't control or don't control, puts it on top or bottom of its owner's library. So this is a classic that we see from adventure spells, where you have this like utility of like getting to the early game, playing a cheap spell, and then getting a 6-mana 6/6 with flash, ward 2, and enters battlefield tapped unless it's your turn. With the amount of Lotus Fields that we have, this can come down super early. In conjunction with Teferi, Hero of Dominaria, you can essentially plus draw a card, play Hornlock Whale, during your turn. So then it comes into play untapped, and then Teferi, Hero of Dominaria will just untap those 2 lands that you used to play for the Hornlock Whale. It's just something you can do. Really, with this deck playing more like a control deck, even if you flash this in and it enters the battlefield tapped, it's not really a big deal. Because obviously it still has ward 2, so your opponent still has to pay 2 extra mana to end up dealing with it. So definitely a neat control like win condition in a way that also gives you some early game utility in just kind of tempoing your opponent and messing with like their creatures and stuff. Just putting stuff on top and bottom of the library, you can like essentially take them out of draw steps, even like by their own choice. So pretty neat and a nice new addition from Wilds of Eldraine. The typical blue-white planeswalker slot with the Wandering Emperor and Teferi Hero Dominaria. Teferi Hero Dominaria has been a staple of blue-white X decks, mainly like control decks forever, really since it was printed in Dominaria, and still a very good planeswalker that in itself is a win condition thanks to its minus ability. You eventually get to a point where you have no other cards in your deck. You just have a Teferi Hero Dominaria. You're just able to put it back into your deck, and if you have an emblem, your opponent very unlikely to actually be able to remove the Teferi, and you just eventually win the game very slowly, and it's really a test of like how long your opponent's willing to play. Wandering Emperor is obviously is one of the most annoying planeswalkers to play. The fact that it has flash, enters the battlefield, she can activate her loyalty abilities anytime that you can cast an instant the turn that she comes into play. So of course, your opponent attacks. They can't now attack the Wandering Emperor, so they get to exile. You get to exile one of the creatures, gain some life, and then from there, you're able to keep the Wandering Emperor around if it's beneficial to you. If not, just trade it for a 2/2 Samurai. Heck, even make a 2/2 Samurai, eat like a smaller creature in combat, and then you kind of get the plus and attack, make a bigger creature, and make combat even more annoying for your opponent. And then eventually just -2 when it's convenient for you if that situation actually comes up. So that's kind of like our win conditions, right? Like that's how we're gonna win the game. There's essentially 6 of them. Wandering Emperor, I guess you would count that as one. Strict Proctor Beats, I'm sure is the thing, but I'm guessing that is like Plan Z of this deck. So the other spells are going to help us get to the late game, and get to those points. So you have March of Otherworldly Light, which could be like a cheap spell. Obviously, it's an X spell in a deck where we're playing Lotus Field and Thespian Stage and trying to generate tons of mana super early on. So a lot of the time you're going to be able to pay X a lot of the time, even for like some of the bigger creatures. Getting an artifact, creature, enchantment. It's very versatile in that way, and of course, even if you have it as like your only spell and you don't have any Lotus Fields or copied Lotus Fields and whatnot, you're able to still like make your land drops and just get rid of bigger things with it, especially at the help of like exiling a white card from your hand to reduce the cost by 2. So pretty neat. Faithful Absence is destroys a creature or planeswalker and his controller makes a clue token, or rather they investigate, which means they make a clue token. You have Impulse is, looking at 4 cards, put one to your hand, the rest on the bottom. Good for digging for, Lotus Field, Thespian Stage, or looking for a Strict Proctor so you can keep your lands around, so you can play that Lotus Field. Memory Deluge, another one of those spells that you can end up playing, and like flashing it back means you get to look at 7 cards and put 2, so it's kind of like a dig through time in that sense, but having some added utility of being able to cast it, for 4 mana and get to like 4 cards and take 2 of them, which is pretty good and a lot better for you personally, just because I think for 1 card you end up being able to get 4 cards, and the mana restriction on this isn't going to be too taxing considering the fact that you are a Lotus Field deck. And again, like a lot of this stuff kind of hinges on finding a Lotus Field and then like getting to play like 1 or 2 of them, and then just kind of snowball that mana advantage that you gained from playing so many Lotus Fields. You have Supreme Verdict, destroys all creatures, can't be countered, super clean, easy. Like the only thing that could stop this really off the top of my head would be from like Azorius Spirits playing, their dumb Spell Queller and spell quelling Supreme Verdict. But of course, there's a bunch of other spells in here that end up dealing with that. You have Discontinuity, which of course, like in my incoherent rambling and all my talking about these, great, powerful, wonderful blue-white cards, this is also another way that you can keep a Lotus Field around. So as long as your turn, it costs 2 and 2 blue less to cast, so it costs 6 mana total, triple blue and 3, and with that cost reduction, it makes it cost 1 and a blue on your turn, and it just ends the turn. So you could play Lotus Field with the trigger on the stack, end the turn. It takes all the, I'll read it. So it exiles all spells and abilities from the stack, including this card. The player whose turn it is discards down to the maximum hand size, damage wears off, and this turn until end of turn effects end. So you are just it works out. It benefits you for the fact that you get to keep this Lotus Field around. And then longevity wise, like later in the game, you can just essentially use this as like a take an extra turn spell. You end up like activating your Teferi, you go through the motions and everything, and then maybe like cast another spell on their turn, depending on how much mana you have, and then discontinuity to just end the turn. Your opponent doesn't really get to do anything unless they have something in response to this, and so on. And makes it kind of like a fancy, like, take an extra turn spell, which, is neat and a nice roundabout way of going through it with some added utility of, like, being able to also counter an opponent's spell and then punish them by also ending their turn right away. 3 Farewell, 6 mana, getting to deal with all artifacts, creatures, enchantments, or graveyards. Gravewalkers? That doesn't make any sense. Exile all graveyards, getting to do this all in one shot. You don't have to choose just one mode. You can choose as many that are applicable. Seagate Restoration lets you draw cards equal to the amount of cards in your hand +1, and then you have no max hand size the rest of the game. Also doubles as a land. Ondu Inversion, same thing. Destroys all non-land permanents, so it's essentially like a planar cleansing, but has the added benefit of being a land, so you get to play essentially 27 lands in this deck. You have Castle Ardenvale, Castle Ventress, Inaganjo, Hall of the Storm Giants. Really like the lands that you would expect to have as one-ofs in like a blue-white deck. You have 4 Hallowed Fountain, you have 4 Hengegate Pathway that just decides it wants to freak out on my camera, Irrigated Farmland, a tap dual land that ends up cycling, gives you a little bit of like utility later on. You have Otawara, another one of that we would expect, a plains, or an island, a plains, and then your Lotus Field / Thespian Stage package. And of course, the reason why that we are 4-color control and not just a super fancy blue-white control deck was 2 Dragonlord Jamoka and 2 Thought Distortion. Now, these cards actually being very good, considering that Thought Distortion can't be countered, your opponent reveals their hand, and then all non-creature, non-land cards are exiled from that player's hand and graveyard. So, like in the control matchups, this card is very good because obviously they can't counter it, and then you get to take all of like their counter spells, the wraths, and so on, and makes the game a heck of a lot easier for you. On top of like Dragonlord Jamoka as well, being a spell that can't be countered, your opponents can't cast spells during your turn, and just being a big 5/7 flying lifelinker. That's eventually, even against like the aggressive decks and things like that, it's going to put some distance between you and losing the game, while also giving you a win condition to win the game that is very hard for them to deal with. From there, you have Temporary Lockdown that gets rid of each non-land permanent, mana value 2 or less until it leaves. You have Mystical Dispute, really for handling like the control decks. Also, the fact that you do make tons of mana, theoretically very often, that the 3 mana counter target spell unless the controller pays 3 really doesn't matter, because even in like the early game, you're able to pay for this pretty consistently. You have Rest in Peace for the graveyard decks, and then Dovin's Veto as an uncounterable negate, which is just a nice, easy way to win some counter war matchups. So, yeah, that is 4-color control, fancy blue-white Lotus Field control for Pioneer. As I have said, probably about every Pioneer deck and every Modern deck, and really any deck that sees a considerable amount of play, the deck is sweet. It's got a soft spot for me because I love Teferi Hero Dominaria. I played a lot of this card when it was standard legal, and just the amount of games where like you play Teferi Hero Dominaria and it sticks on the board, and you're just drawing an extra card every turn. You're getting to take game actions, but then also still be able to interact with your opponent in a meaningful way. This deck just gets to take it to a whole new level by using one of the most broken lands that is currently legal in Pioneer, and using it in a way that's more fair than the other version, but still making it unfair because of all these like powerful, high-costed spells that you get to play that end up playing very well with what people are trying to do in the format. So yeah, pretty cool. I'm going to try to play some of it, but we'll see how it goes. I'm definitely more interested in the Modern deck that we have for this week. But if you want to see gameplay of this deck, you want to see more stuff about it, show it off, what have you, please consider subscribing to the channel. Ring the notification bell so you know when videos like this and others get posted. Comment down below, leave a like on the video, all that fun stuff. All of it supports my content, keeps me making videos, and I love doing this, so please, please, please do so. And yeah, that's going to do it for me in this video. Hope you all enjoyed. Hope to see you all in the next one.